Now we are live on Erupt, waiting for people to show up. Hey, that rhymed. We're live on Erupt, waiting for people to show up. Corinne joined. What's up, Corinne? I'm gonna click on that wave button. Hi, Hagar. Hagar, I'm so glad you're here. I'm gonna need you to request joining me very soon. In fact, how do I do this? How do I get Hagar to join? Okay, I'm gonna figure this out. Hagar. Okay. Now I'm waiting for Gloria. Sup, girl?
Hi, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm good. Do you hear me well? Is everything
I hear you fantastic.
good?
You are bigger than life. You are bigger than my iPhone. Do you hear
Oh,
me?
I like to hear that. Do I look good? You look beautiful. You look
You look
fabulous.
beautiful. You look This is what we're going to do for an hour, everyone. We're just going to tell each other how pretty we are. I'm just kidding. Okay, so I'm waiting for Gloria to join us right now. But for those 6 of you who have joined, this is going to be a really, really special conversation with 2 of the smartest women I know, big personalities. They both have huge followings. These are huge thought leaders in the political space. They don't agree on everything, which will be also very interesting. Yeah. Let me see. Let me see if Gloria, yes, she is here. All right. Gloria, where are you at? Hagar, it's so good to have you. Hi, Gloria.
Hello, hola Miriam. Nice to meet you. How are you
Nice,
guys?
nice to meet you, Gloria. Great to meet you.
Gloria, where are you right now? You look like you're
I,
in undergrad.
I am in the House of Liberty. This is the UFM, Universidad Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala, my alma mater, in some seminars that are really interesting. So yeah, here we are.
Really? What was the last seminar you were just in?
Actually, there's one going on right now about if we are able to lose our tribal mentality. And before that, we were talking about artificial intelligence and the connection between psychological evolution, evolutionary psychology, sorry, and technology. So really interesting things.
Oh my gosh, I wish I was there with you and not here in the heart of Hollywood. But alas, this is where I'm at. Everyone watching, we have 122 people watching right now. My name is Miriam Isa. I am one of the hosts here at Erupt. Erupt is a news platform that is trying to bridge the left and the right. We want to be a news platform where all points of views are discussed and are rigorously debated, but from a place of dignity and respect, and also some fun and some humor. So that's me, former e-news reporter and YouTuber turned journalist. And to the bottom left of me, we have Hagar Shamali. Hagar is Lebanese, and Hagar has worked in the White House. She has worked under Obama. She has worked for I think the NSA. She's got one of those really impressive resumes and LinkedIn pages that probably makes it impossible for her to date if she was single, because she's super intimidating. So Hagar is always the smartest woman in any room, in fact, probably the smartest person in any room. And then on the other side, I have Gloria Alvarez, who's one of my closest friends. Gloria is a huge thought leader, especially within the libertarian world. Gloria is a huge content creator. Gloria has a gajillion followers all over the globe. I walked through streets with Gloria all around the world, and people stop her to thank her for her contribution to the fight for freedom. So Gloria is also the smartest person in any room that she's in. So I'm so excited to put y'all in the same room right here on IG Live.
Thank you, Miriam, for that wonderful presentation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, Hagar. And yeah, I think that 3 brilliant female minds talking about current issues is something that the world so desperately needs. So congratulations to Erupt and to you for bringing this together.
Thank you,
Likewise,
beautiful.
I'm so excited, especially because it's 3 women talking about this stuff, and it's so important. I'm so excited about it.
I mean, whenever you click on the news, it's usually a bunch of men, a bunch of male talking heads, unpacking global events. So it's about time that we just had a platform of, in this moment, an IG Live of women unpacking the world. Now, today's episode is called who is on our shit list this week. And the three of us have concluded that who is on our shit list this week is the freaking Cuban government. Where do we begin? So for those of you who are just tuning in who don't understand what happened, let's break it down. This past Monday was a very important date. Cubans, black, white, young, old, had planned a nationwide protest in Cuba to promote human rights. And that went down on the 15th of November, except that it didn't go down because the Cuban government, the dictatorship, promised to wage a war on anyone that left their house to protest. So the Cuban government deployed the military and the police, stopped Cubans from literally leaving their houses. They canceled the internet for the day. They canceled public transportation. So all that the Cuban people were allowed to do was dress in white, hang from their windows in Cuba, and wave the white rose, which is the Cuban symbol for peace and independence. That all went down on Monday. And my question, I want to start off with you two. So much happened and didn't happen on Monday in Cuba. Where was the media?
Oh,
That's
oh, I'm sorry. It doesn't get enough. All of the U.S. media here, at least, especially cable news, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but they're worried about viewers, right? And they think that American viewers aren't interested in these issues. And by the way, that is not at all my experience. I talk nothing but geopolitics, right? Geopolitics is so crazy, you can't make it up. This type of news that's around the world, including in Cuba, is so insane. It's like a Hollywood movie over and over again. I wish the US media would be better about covering these issues. Online and print media wasn't that bad. Like New York Times and Reuters and Wall Street Journal, they all had articles about it. But overall, I'm pretty disappointed in the US media coverage of this.
I'm pretty
And also,
disappointed.
you go.
Oh, no, sorry. In general, of the media in Latin America, we organized a protest in front of the embassy of the Cuban dictatorship that ended up being in the monument of Jose Marti, where the white rose analogy comes from. And media of Guatemala, only one independent online magazine showed up. And I think it's because people don't understand that supporting Cubans is supporting getting rid, talking about the shit list, and who is in our shit list. Here is the head of the shit list, right? And all the and all the offspring that Cuba has done in all of Latin America. Nicaragua dictatorship, Venezuela dictatorship, governments that have stolen elections. And even if the European Union says there has been fraud, all of this goes back to Cuba. So any Latin American that is interested in ending corruption, the violence of the drug dealers, injustice, socialism, and poverty should be interested in the Cuban case, because it's all connected. I wish it wasn't. I wish it was something that is just about like an island, like the Gaza people, right? They suffer and nobody else really cares. But this is a cancer that it spreads all over Latin America, and it's really disappointing that the media in Latin America doesn't cover it enough.
The thing that I love about Gloria and Hagar is that they not only understand geopolitics from a very macro level, they also understand on a very micro level how things are connected, how a little island in the Caribbean is helping to spawn cancers all over the world. And I think that part is really important for people to understand. Now, in U.S. politics and in the U.S. news cycle, there are certain countries and topics that we cover all the time. The Middle East and, the Middle East, we cover all the time. Mexico, the border crisis, we cover all the time. What is it that those places have in common? China's another one. What is it that those topics have in common that Cuba does not? Or what is it about Cuba that people don't want to touch? Is it because we love to romanticize Cuba as this sexy little vacation spot and nobody wants to ruin that?
It's possible. From the US media perspective, they're all worried about ratings and clicks, right? That's all they want. It's very different than someone like me, for example, that's independent, and I can talk about whatever I think matters. And a big part of what I try to do is try to explain to Americans why what we do here, what the media covers, how we vote, what we prioritize matters very much abroad, right? And you are seeing very terrifyingly over the last few years, the activities of dictators and human rights abusers around the world is only growing. And the reason is that we have given off this message that we're going to let people get away with everything, right? Saudi Arabia can go, the crown prince can go murder a Washington Post columnist brutally in a consulate, and everybody can know about it. And yet US businesses are still going to Saudi Arabia and looking to invest, or looking for Saudi Arabian money for them to invest, right? That sends the wrong message, because we are literally enabling these dictators and human rights abusers around the world. And as Gloria mentioned, they really are all interconnected, right? Some of them really do work together. For example, the Cuban government and the Venezuelan government are very close. The U.S. government has tried to target that relationship, right? Like when the Cuban government is sending oil to Venezuela, for example, things like that. So on one hand, they prop each other up. But if these guys have each other and then have U.S. businesses involved, U.S. artists performing for them, or they have, for example, Cuba, the Cuban government is on the UN Human Rights Council, right? That gives them legitimacy. It is a farce. And so that enables this system, and just it grows. And I think we have to all, I think the American youth in particular, they are very interested in this, and they all feel strongly against it. And I really hope that as they grow, as we all grow, that we just don't tolerate this behavior anymore.
I absolutely agree with Hagar. And in the case of Latin America, it's because there are minorities super well organized that for decades have benefited monetarily from Cuba's dictatorship. Is just good for business, for corrupt people, starting with the drug cartels. Without the Cuban dictatorship, you wouldn't have a successful FARC. You wouldn't have all the cartels of Mexico, because they have used Cuba to transport this super successful business that nobody wants to legalize, because in the moment that it goes legal, you cannot use that money to finance socialism of the 21st century. But it's not only that, it's also Marxist unions. From Mexico all the way down to Argentina, you are going to find in the state universities of all of the countries a Che Guevara monument, a Karl Marx hallway, a Fidel Castro, like a homage in different senses, and they all teach communism. In Universidad San Carlos de Guatemala, I have been threatened, like my life has been threatened, for bringing Venezuelans to oppose seminars that they make to say how wonderful Cuba is and how wonderful Venezuela is. And when I try to bring people that migrated to Guatemala suffering from this, they threaten your life, and they organize themselves like the KGB used to organize the Soviets. And this is happening all over Latin America. Aside with the fact that we recognize this dictatorship, there is a Cuban embassy everywhere in Latin America. So as long as you have a Cuban embassy that has no use whatsoever, but just bring college students to go and be indoctrinated in Cuba, and of course, they show them the super successful hospitals, the super successful schools that are all a facade, just like in North Korea, right? But then they come back to their countries completely brainwashed after, hooking up with teenager prostitutes and having the time of their lives in parties with all the money that has been stolen for decades from Cuban workforce that are paid $1, $2 a month. And they come back to these countries, and you know what? They become the leaders of the unions, like Joviel Acevedo, the leader of the union of the Ministry of Education in Guatemala, that for more than 25 years has been in that position, talking about a dictatorship, and he steals 93 cents of every quetzal that we pay on taxes. So then when you go to schools in Guatemala, you see schools have no toilets, no books, let alone computers or internet. And this is the infiltration of Cuba in just 2 or 3 examples of how they indoctrinate, and they are good for business, for the corrupts of this continent, in education, in health unions, in narco traffic, and of course oil. Like, Odebrecht also, you know, Odebrecht was the biggest corruption scandal of this continent. And it was not the right-wing collectivist and corrupt people from the 90s. No, no, no. Odebrecht was the biggest case of corruption orchestrated with the socialism of the 21st century that promised us that Caracas, Venezuela was going to be the New York City of all of Latin America, and we all were going to move there. Of course, this never happened. So it is in the best interest of a lot of people in this continent to keep Cuba an enslaved island, because it's giving them a lot of money from everything they have stolen.
Interesting. So what you're both pointing out is that there's this massive machine that is keeping this dictator in place, which begs the question, the people in Cuba, the young millennials and Generation Zers who are in Cuba trying to fight with nothing, with stones, without an internet, what do they do? Like, they couldn't even leave their homes on Monday. What is left for them?
So, you know, without sounding over idealistic, I really do think that things are going to change eventually for them, because the thing that I found so telling in what happened on Monday is that, well, first, let's start a little back over the summer when protests started in Cuba, right? And the momentum started. That was a big deal, because protests like that, of that size, where thousands hit the street, do not happen often. And they don't happen out of fear of the government reaction, right? But the fact that you had this protest planned in advance by activists, right, and artists and doctors and journalists, shows, and the way the government reacted, right? This is not a government that has a lot of money, and yet they spent every resource they had to put police, state security agents, civilians on every corner and at every house for days before this protest to prevent people from leaving their homes. And even, as you mentioned, those people who put their hand out the window to hold a white flower, which symbolizes freedom, for some of them, people covered the windows with the Cuban flag, right? What are they so afraid of? The government is behaving so fearful all of a sudden. So it's kind of interesting, because the fear is suddenly switching. And to me, that means that they're trying to hide their inherent weakness. Now, again, I don't want to be over idealistic and say like, it's okay. It means that they're so close. It's going to take a lot of time. And I'm hopeful that with policies that, you know, if the international community can finally prioritize Cuba, the way they prioritize addressing the Middle East, the way they prioritize addressing China, then maybe together they can say, hey, maybe together we should figure out what sanctions to pursue, what sanctions to remove, to support the Cuban people while targeting those who are corrupt and repressing the Cuban citizens and inflicting these human rights abuses. So I am hopeful, because you see that tide shifting, and a lot of it is coming from the citizens themselves, but I do think it's going to take time.
Gloria, do you agree with Hagar that fear has switched sides, that at this point the brutal Cuban regime is more afraid of the people than the people are afraid of the brutal regime?
I believe that tables are turning, because everything I heard from the generation of my grandparents, someone there was saying, can we get a Cuban actually on the live? Actually, Miriam and I were both Cuban. My dad was Cuban. And I just encountered...
Which, by the way, sorry, just needed to point out, Hagar is Lebanese, Gloria is Cuban, and I'm now in a fantastic Cuban Lebanese sandwich. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It's all your nationalities. That is true. So I just encountered somebody that said when July 11 happened, that was the first rebellion, he said to me, the first person that came to my mind was your father, because my father passed away last year. And my father was that incredulous generation that thought Cuba will never change, because he saw it his entire life, right? Since the 60s, when he arrived in Guatemala as a pre-teenager, looking at his father trying to help Cubans to get outside of the island until now. And now that I see what happened from July 11 on, it's completely unprecedented from the Cuba and the dictatorship that I've heard since I was a little kid. Something is definitely changing. The Cuban regime It's not as powerful as it was before. And now that you mentioned millennials and centennials, there's an amazing documentary done by Carlos Alberto Montaner Jr., also a Cuban. And he did a documentary, I think it was almost 12 years ago, called The Grandsons of the Cuban Revolution. So he went to Cuba with hidden cameras, interviewing millennials at that time, right? Our generation. And he asks, what do you think about the revolution? Do you like the revolution? And people go like this because they cannot talk, right? If they talk, they get incarcerated.
Right.
And they're like, I've been listening since I was a little kid that the Cuban Revolution was going to give me all the fruits that my grandparents and my parents did not see, that I was going to be the generation that finally would see the abundance. And now that I am a grown adult, I see that all of it was a lie. So meanwhile, Latin Americans all over our countries praise Che Guevara and romanticize the Cuban Revolution. The young people in Cuba are desperate to get out of there, because I believe it's even more cruel to teach someone how to write, how to read, give them a degree of engineering or medicine or astrophysics, and then condemn them to become prostitutes because they're going to earn more money with that. Compared to the poverty where there are people that don't know how to read, how to write, have no education whatsoever, and they still risk their lives in the desert, a super deadly desert, to go to the United States. I compare and I say, which one is more cruel? It's like you enlighten the brain of somebody to then tell them, you know what? You're never getting out of this island, and you might be a taxi driver or a bartender or a prostitute because you're going to earn more money with that than with your wonderful brains. I think that's the worst thing of them all. And the young people in Latin America that are not seeing that, and they praise this dead psychopath, racist, homophobic called Che Guevara, are so wrong, you know. And I won't never be tired, and until I can make the governments of Latin America take out the Cuban embassy. Because it's like, as long as you have that embassy inside of your country, you're saying, yeah, I support this. And you have your hands full of blood.
This takes a lot of international coordination for us to remove the Cuban embassies from around the world. So everyone that's watching right now, we have 94 amazing, passionate people who joined this conversation because they care. And if you all in the chat can please just write down where you are. Like, we just want to know where you are. Like, I'm in Los Angeles right now. Gloria, ¿dónde estás tú?
Guatemala.
And Hagar, where are you?
I'm in Connecticut, just outside New York City.
Just outside of New York City, in Connecticut. Nosotros queremos oír de ustedes. We want to hear from you. ¿Dónde están? Ponlo en el chat. You make such a good point, Gloria, about how destabilizing it is for a country when you enlighten the mind but shackle the body. That actually happened a lot in the Palestinian territory in the 90s. It's actually the reason why we built all of these walls separating the West Bank from Israel. Because what's interesting is at the time they had a lot of suicide bombers. They had a lot of female suicide bombers. They had a lot of university educated female suicide bombers in the 90s in the West Bank. There is a reason for that. That is a break in the historical pattern of suicide bombers. Suicide bombers tend to be at the very bottom of the hierarchy in a given society. They are so desperate that it's like, oh, I have nothing else to lose. But in Palestine, you had highly educated female suicide bombers blowing themselves up because of what Gloria just so eloquently said. The potential reacting with the reality of no opportunities. So it was these women who were bright, who were super, like, getting the best grades in school. And then all of a sudden, after they graduated, they realized there is nowhere for me to go. And that's what is happening with the young people in Cuba right now. Now I want to talk about one Cuban guy specifically. Public enemy number one in Cuba is a young guy named Junior Garcia Aguilera. Would someone tackle who he is? Does anyone know who he is?
Well, he's a playwright. He's a playwright and artist, and he's been very inspirational. And he's the one who's led this movement right now to do the march that was supposed to happen on Monday. And if you look at the press, if you Google Cuba protests, you're going to see the image of him sticking his hand out of his window with the rose, that white rose, and a white sheet that is also meant to symbolize freedom. I mean, the color white. And somebody in the apartment above him is the one that put that flag to cover his window. He said that he was ready and willing to march by himself if needed, and to hold the rose in honor of all those who couldn't march, and all those who, by the way, remain imprisoned since the protests in July as well. There are many that remain imprisoned since July. And so that was his goal. Now, obviously, he was prevented from even leaving his home. And what's remarkable is the fear they have around this one individual.
Right.
And the thing that, and I want to add one comment about, on top of what you were saying about the Palestinians and what Gloria was saying, the power of the young generation and how different they view things. And, this is how the Arab Spring started. Now, I don't want to say, I would not wish to impose how the Arab Spring went down. I was at the White House for the Arab Spring, on any country. But the way it started, what ignited it, was a Tunisian man who had his degree in computer science, and he literally couldn't get a job. So he was selling wares on the street, and he had a cart. And then when the government confiscated his cart, he set himself on fire out of sheer frustration, right? And it unleashed these protests across the region, right? Now, some of them turned out okay. Tunisia actually was the one that turned out okay, though we could talk about that another day. It's having a lot of problems now. But anyway, it turned out okay. And then a lot of them had problems. But the fact is, you have this young generation that is educated, that sees what life is on the internet, that sees what democracy is like. And they know their potential, and they know what they want. And by the way, you also see it in Cuban Americans in the United States, right? The young generation is very different than the older generation. And sanctions is a good example of that. The older generation wants to keep the sanctions regime as it is, because they believe that that's what's going to bring down the communist government. Listen, it's been a long time and it hasn't brought them down, right? The younger generation understands you don't have to have this whole trade embargo. You can do a more surgical, deliberate way of sanctioning those that are involved in the police, involved with the Ministry of the Interior, right? These bad guys.
You literally worked within the departments that organize sanctions around the world. So I am very curious to know, from your recommendation, what would be the right targeted sanctions for a country like Cuba? And also for everyone that's watching right now. We are reading your comments. Thank you for everything that you're contributing to this conversation. The guy from Chile that said, yeah, you make more money as an Uber driver in Chile than being a college educated professional. We hear you. And that is why what we are discussing right now affects all of us. Now back to sanctions and the queen of sanctions. Gar, what do you recommend?
Right? It's so funny what you say. It's like, it's the economy, stupid, right? Like, just like what it always boils down to. And that's what people want. So for sanctions, you already see the Biden administration pursuing this. Since July, they've had 4 rounds of sanctions. And they've been targeting those. They've just targeted the Minister of Defense. They've targeted police officials, and they've targeted officials from the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of the Revolutionary Armed. I'm missing the word. Anyway, on that ministry, because they're targeting those who are repressing people and committing human rights abuse. Now, I've been on the other side of Treasury. I can tell you that when they start these sanctions, they usually have a huge list of people or companies in mind, and they slowly ratchet the sanctions up, and they leave ones that they haven't done yet in order to continuously increase pressure to change behavior, right? That's the goal, is to change behavior. But the United States can't do it alone. And right now they're pretty much doing it alone. And my guess, this is really speculation here. I see the wind blowing with the Biden administration. When they're ramping up those sanctions, my speculation is that they're going to work with Congress to undo the full trade embargo that is hurting the regular Cuban citizen, right? Because that's what President Obama wanted to do. He couldn't. But the way I'm seeing sanctions shift in Washington, I think that that's what they're targeting. They're going to try and do these more targeted sanctions and get rid of this really useless trade embargo.
Interesting. Okay, so then I kind of want to recap what we're saying right now. From your experience with the government, the American government is doing right now in terms of sanctions, Cuba is we are going to eventually remove the general embargo that affects the people, and we're going to create very specific targeted sanctions that affect the bad people. What we're also discussing is that we need, like I said, we need to remove the Cuban embassies from around the world. We have to stop giving this regime legitimacy, a regime that did not win by election, a regime that won by acts of terror, and now they're accusing any kind of dissenter in their country as being a terrorist. The irony is not lost on me, but unfortunately it is lost on a lot of the American people. My final question to you, because I know we have to wrap this up because you two are the most in-demand people that I know. My final question is, let's fast forward to that future that Hagar was talking about, the day that Cuba is free. Let's fast forward to that future that Gloria worked so hard for every day of her life as a thought leader in Latin America. The day that the dictatorship is toppled, the next day, what are the biggest challenges that Cuba will face then? And I am thinking of the Arab Spring as I ask this question. What do we do in that vacuum? We must prepare for that.
Well, first of all, I think that there has to be top 3 decisions to be made. Number 1 is that with or without embargo, Cubans need to have the freedom to leave the island and to get inside the island. Think of the Berlin Wall, right? Once the dictatorship is over, there has to be freedom of mobility. And this has nothing to do with the US embargo, because there's had never been embargo for all Europeans to go to 5-star hotels and drink margaritas and eat lobster and, engage in businesses. The Spanish have done businesses all these decades. It is the Cuban dictatorship that has not allowed for Cubans to have the freedom to leave or to get in, like myself. I am half Cuban. I would love to go to Cuba. I can't. And there are people that want to get out and they can't. So that's number 1, freedom of mobility. It has to be immediate. Second, freedom and rights to private property. Cubans right now do not hold the right to open a restaurant, a hairdressing salon, an advertisement agency, to be an architect and rebuild beautiful Havana and charge a salary for that. All of that is not allowed. And it's because the Cuban dictatorship doesn't allow it, let alone saving money in different currencies. Bitcoin, Ethereum, the dollar, the yuan, the quetzal, the Mexican peso, whatever the Cubans would like to save, they can't. So I would just start with those 3 things. And then we can go deep into the constitutional things that have to be allowed. Like, for example, freedom of expression. It's just impossible.
Freedom to walk out of your goddamn house with a white rose.
Exactly. Or form a political party or a think tank or an association. All of these are things that regular Cubans cannot do. If I want to go to Cuba and purchase the theater of my great-grandmother and create a cultural center there, I can't. I cannot engage in business with regular Cubans. And this is not because of the US embargo. With or without the embargo, Cubans have never had the right to engage in these kind of businesses and liberties. And I think that this is crucial. And then, in my personal experience, for what I've seen in the rest of Latin America, we have to tackle the big elephant in the room, and that is narco traffic. Because Cuban dictatorship has been the number 1 ally of narco traffic and the war on drugs that has spent trillions of dollars of American taxpayer money in nothing that is successful. And with narco traffic being illegal, that dictatorship is not going to fall. And of course, there are Cuban leaders, like, for example, Rosa Maria Payá, who might not agree on that. And then we can discuss that. But for me, going back to the basics, we need freedom of mobility, freedom of expression, freedom of property rights, and freedom to save and sell and buy in the currency that you please, be it Bitcoin, dollar, Ethereum, or whatever you want.
I love it. Gloria for president, Guatemala.
Yes.
Has anyone ever been president in 2 different countries?
Sorry?
Has anyone ever been president in 2 different countries? Because Gloria ran for president in Guatemala, going to again. So I'd like to win both in Guatemala, but also in Cuba. I will be your pen and secretary. Hagar, as a Middle Eastern woman, en tu carne, tú entiendes en tu carne, you understand acutely what Middle Eastern people went through during the Arab Spring. Share with us what you think are the biggest challenges, things that we should look out for the day that Cuba is.
I'm so glad you asked this question, because one of the things that we always talked about at the White House during the Arab Spring was who's going to pick up the trash the next day, right? The government collapses. Who's going to pick up that trash? Who's going to make sure that schools are open? Who's going to make sure that towns are running, right? The electricity is on, the lights are on. And it's a very difficult thing, because that's not something that other countries can really do for other countries, right? And the thing that we learned at the White House was you have to have a group of oppositionists, activists, civil society that exists, that's there and united, so that they can benefit from the training and assistance of international governments, international nonprofit organizations, and so on, to be trained in how to organize communities, how to organize elections, how to govern, right? That's not easy. It sounds so simple for anybody who's been raised in a country that is democratic, right? It sounds like it's just natural, right? And the thing is, though, for countries, and I know this is something we faced a lot of challenges with when we were working with Middle Eastern counterparts, oppositionists in particular, and for me it was Syrian oppositionists. I was working with Syrian oppositionists, and it is difficult when they've been raised in a dictatorship, under a dictatorship, to train them, right? It's not that they don't know they want it. They know they want it. They understand the ideology, but the actual practice is difficult. We know it from our own country here, right? It's not easy. You have to fight for democracy. It's very difficult. And so it's that kind of training that you need to give to civil society, but you also need to reach them to do it. And that's what's so difficult with the Cuban citizens in particular. Now, the thing that I would add is that over the summer, the Biden administration and the Treasury Department issued a number of general licenses. I don't want to get too nerdy here, so I'm going to give a very brief overview. They issued these general licenses to allow the United States to send software, to use telecommunications, internet services, informational pamphlets even. And they've allowed that that was not allowed under the Trump administration, right? Mm-hmm. So they understand that they're trying to do things to reach the Cuban citizen, right, to empower them and train them with these practices, with the thought, with community organization, to help them to organize, to topple the government one day, although the Biden administration probably would never say that, and to one day govern fairly and democratically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for explaining that. You're absolutely right. We should be arming the community on a grassroots level with the tools, so that that future that we keep talking about, that future that we are fighting for, when it arrives, they are prepared to stand up and lead. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that. We clearly lost Gloria. Gloria just texted me saying, I don't know why, but it kicked me off. I hope that she, who knows if people are getting shadow banned for talking about these things. But Gloria, if you're still watching, we love you and thank you so much for contributing so much to this conversation. Hagar, you are fantastic. Everybody watching, follow Hagar. Hagar is one of the smartest people in American government. She also has a fantastic YouTube channel with the most amazing fun videos. She has a fantastic Instagram account. So everyone watching right now, todo lo que están viendo esto en este momento, por favor, vayan al canal de Hagar and follow her. Sigan a Hagar. Síganos a nosotros Erupt Now. Yo soy Miriam Isa. I am Miriam Isa. Honored to have this conversation with such brilliant minds. And next time, I want all of you contributing a little more and let me know what you're fighting for in your countries. You're reading these comments. This is a two-way street. Anyway, Hagar, thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all of you who are watching and who were commenting. I was looking at all of the comments. Thank you for the support. It means the world. I cannot tell you how much it means when you're trying to build a brand based on a mission to try and inform people on why this stuff matters, why it's important, and why awareness alone will ultimately undermine dictators and human rights abusers. So your support means the world. Thank you. And thank you to all of you. And
That's such a that's such a good point that I want to like recalcarlo. I want to restate it for those of you watching right now. If you care about human rights, but on Instagram you only follow the Kardashians and your favorite fashion brands, then we are missing the point. Like, follow the people who are trying to drive these conversations forward. Gloria is one of them. So is Hagar. So is Erupt. And so am I. My Instagram is at Miriam_Isa, Medium Isa. George, thank you for the great minds and the claps right back at you. Anyway, thank you, everyone. And I'll talk to you all soon. Ciao.
Bye. Thank you.